All right, welcome to the cybernetic communism theory spaces. Just going to wait for a minute or two. I set an alarm to start this and didn't hear it going off, so I'm a few minutes late. From the time that I said I would start this, so that's not off to a great start. But it does not look like it's going to be a big problem, I guess. So there's a couple of things that I was going to talk about. I'm Johann and Ben Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness for a technological New Jerusalem. And this is a space on Twitter that's open to all. Hopefully, a few will join, but we shall see. You know what? Let's just dive right in here. The focus of this conversation is on two things: books to do with cybernetic communism, serious works related to revolutionary thought, theory works, and long story short, there's not a whole lot of those relative to other subfields of revolutionary thought. That is probably the same reason that you might be imagining there is just not this level of interest in systems theory historically. Cybernetics and systems theory are connected disciplines. And however, an awful lot of the writing of Marxist theorists and thinkers of the last few decades does relate in some way to advanced technology or systems thinking, more so than years before. This body of writing is not always terribly interesting. I'll give an example. I recently read a book that is I'm going to pull up the title here. Okay, not a book with the post-Marxist philosopher and popular figure. His name in the title. His name is Slavoj Žižek, and this is a book written by another writer whose name I'll share in a moment, about Žižek, and it's the book is called "Does the Internet Have an Unconscious?" It's talking about mostly just a lot of popular filth, pop garbage nonsense that Žižek will tend to engage with, and describing whether or not this is much to do with scientific communism, and it's really not. You can look at Žižek's work endorsing or kind of basically endorsing Donald Trump days before the 2016 election. You know, and saying correctly that Trump is a neoliberal, no better or worse than the other neoliberal monsters of DC, and that his the fact that he is his effect on that neoliberal system will tend to be disruptive, makes him preferable to the others. These are all killers of the planet, people who should be hanging upside down from a lamppost. So that that sort of tricky analysis of saying, oh, he's you know, he's not worse, I would vote for him over someone else. That's not much to do with scientific communism. A lot of that kind of unseriousness is permeates a lot of his work and a lot of his presentations. That is one extreme. On the other extreme of writers of recent years, more that we could say in a sort of cybernetics vein that's not so troubling, is a work that I read called Art and Cosmotechnics by Yuk Hui. And this is a book that was legitimately describing cultural factors, not in the absurd way that Žižek would. And in this book, for example, was written in the late 2010s, shortly before it started to become well understood that large language models were of use in the way that they are now as a free or a low-cost writing assistant that is able to do academic level work with relatively little effort. And this the author of Art and Cosmotechnics had enough of an understanding of scientific communism to give some insights into the impact of such things, and enough of an understanding of machine learning and advanced computing fundamentals to predict an effect like that of the ChatGPT craze, not putting a time on the likelihood of that effect, but basically saying that such things would soon become commonplace. So that would be an example of a person who is not just kind of a jerk off, like Slavoj Žižek, writing in this post-Marxist field, but doing a little better work. So I would tend to recommend that book in a way that I would generally not recommend Žižek. And I'll give some other examples of people who suffer from a problem that Žižek suffers, who would also be public intellectuals of the United States, and what they all have in common. These are people who are not associated with post-Marxism in the same way. People like Richard Wolff, who would be more associated with, well, let's say that they would be more associated with some kind of anti-communism. Richard Wolff describes himself as a Marxist economist, but he does not exactly approve of state socialism, nor does he exactly approve of militancy. So he focuses on things like pacifism and mutual aid and the building of cooperative formations, which is not exactly the Marxist-Leninist mainline. More importantly, supposing that Richard Wolff's approach would become more widespread, and a great number of bicycle co-ops that offered free services to people opened up, and a great number of apple orchards that encouraged people to take free apples opened up. A great number of co-ops, which would be a nice thing, real co-ops, opened up. What impact does that have on this ticking time bomb of the capitalist climate apocalypse and the $1 trillion a year super polluting abomination of the U.S. military-industrial complex? It's the driver of it all, the world's worst polluter and protector of other super polluters, creating an inescapable global regime of super pollution. What impact does Richard Wolff's pacifism and building of co-ops, even in great number, actually have on stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse in the approximately 5 years that we have left before those effects become so overwhelming that human beings cease to exist in the years to follow? A person advising such a pacifistic approach is a person effectively taking the side of the warmongers and killers of Earth in that context, and that is a specific issue of our time and of the United States. Some of those concerns were not as clear in people's minds when Richard Wolff started writing along these lines. May not have been as but another example of a person who I would regard as a little worse on this would be another public intellectual in the United States who's not associated with also not associated with cybernetic typewriting or post-Marxist typewriting. It would be Chris Hedges. I'll just mention these two other public intellectuals, Chris Hedges and Noam Chomsky. These are people who also suffer from this. Their anti-communism, their lack of support for militancy, and this is the thing that makes them acceptable as public intellectuals in the United States. People who are legitimately fighting imperialist forces, who don't get lines above the fold in the way that these four people that I've just mentioned do, and it is because of those pacifistic lines of thought, which are effectively, for lack of a better word, CIA talking points embedded in their work that really actually serves empire. An example of an even worse such person than Chomsky, Hedges, Wolff, or Žižek would be sitting U.S. Senator Bernard Sanders, the head of the so-called U.S. political revolution, whose job is basically to a sheepdog in the militant elements back into the far-right neoliberal Democratic Party. In recent hours, in recent days and weeks, in the aftermath of the United Healthcare CEO assassination, Senator Sanders made public statements chastening Americans for their support for the righteous justice being doled out to death care social murderers. And again, reminding people that they must operate within the system, which he has helped to rig against people. So this is a person whose work would seem to revolve around the building of something like a single-payer public health service. This is the one thing that Roses, the people that the kind of people that Joseph Stalin referred to as objectively the left wing of fascism. So that is not actually left wing to be the left wing of fascism, right? Roses will tend to go to bat for a public health service, but you can see that that's a very limited willingness to fight there. And it's often as not a willingness to collaborate with fascists and sabotage the actions that would actually bring about the single payer public health service, just as Senator Sanders has done. So again, Bernie Sanders has voted every single time that he's been able for the $1 trillion a year super polluting abomination that's killing the planet and protecting all other super polluters. So is that a socialist? A person who supports military fascism that's killing the planet? I don't think that's actually socialism. Hedges or Chomsky will tend to be critical of all of this, but not to the point where they would renounce this pacifistic impulse and support a true revolution. A question that I was going to ask the person who I thought was joining us, but I'll just ask all of you and hopefully discuss further. And this is it serves well as a thought prompt, as an actual question, and it's to do with the work of Richard Wolff in this context of the cybernetic communist program. So a title of this could be cybernetic communist theory. A second title could be a Ben-Zionist cybernetic communist theory as it relates to the building of a people's superintelligence, specifically an open source large language model workforce multiplier, a work group that, if grown to sufficient scale, could have a transformative effect. And based on the state of machine learning AI agents, as we now enter 2025, today is January 1st, 2025, are sufficiently powerful to build such a thing, this open source large language model work group that would allow its participants to do more with less, simply by hosting an open source large language model on their machines. And so this is the building of a people's superintelligence should have been the focus of this post-Marxist and systems theory focused writing from the first. But I suppose we can forgive these people for not knowing that AI agents would come into existence. Most of you seem to be a little remain a little blind or even a little willfully obtuse as to the strength of these things and the impact of advanced computing and the specific subfield on your lives. It is accurate to say that advanced computing is so-called AI is the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history. More powerful, say, than comparable things leading to revolutions and sea changes such as the advance of weaponry to allow working people to defend themselves, but it also coincides with the existence of imperial forces allowing the elites to micromanage the masses, or effects that predate that, the use of the written word in new ways, creating mass media effects. These two things, the effects of them should not be understated, and I don't know that it's even really possible to understate them. But what those sorts of things do not have, that the emergence of AI agents has, is this force multiplier effect. AI agents are almost endlessly replicable, and that ability to replicate things that are human-like in their abilities is the basis, in my view, for building something very different from capitalistic and socialistic forms of decades and centuries past. So the question then becomes, is Richard Wolff's type focus on mutual aid something that could become not merely the basis for a sustaining force on our comrades, the kind of feature of the dual power that allows people to take care of one another when, as the social safety net is in decay, the United States is not providing those necessaries of life and is forcing people into this rigged system where they're basically not even allowed to live indoors, even if they're working 60 hours a week, because the minimum wage doesn't cover their needs, and other features of this Powell Memorandum type neoliberal world that are tending to dramatically limit the options of workers. So mutual aid is meant to be a thing that does offset that set of problems, and that aspect of it is something that some militants, they would not tend to denounce mutual aid, but will tend to de-emphasize it relative to other things, because the scale of the problem and what must be done to stop it, this 5-year ticking time bomb, wherein we must utterly destroy capitalistic and fascistic forces. So focusing only on mutual aid doesn't exactly do that. But the question, as it relates to this AI agent workforce multiplier, is that AI agent workforce multiplier would not merely be providing some sustaining mutual aid potentially, but becoming a thing that is a power beyond that of the government, with many millions or billions of users, becoming the superstructure itself, a thing able to transform the industrial bases. So in that line of thought, the focus on mutual aid might not be quite so counterproductive, but this is it is important to mention this thing that the capitalistic tech accelerationists do not in this context, which is a great deal of massification need occur. According to the TESCREAL people, the transhumanists, and other capitalistic accelerationist pigs, you need do nothing in this context to achieve utopian outcomes, that the tech acceleration itself will provide that to you, and that capitalists will serve your needs. That is, of course, a lie, and it's a lie that is spread by many such people, An indication of this would be reading a book which is not on the reading list, a book called Fully Automated Luxury Communism. Although I think if you've read an awful lot of other actual theory works, you know, you've already read State and Revolution and the works of Mao several times, you've already read the collected works of Joseph Stalin, Engels, and Lenin several times, then maybe you might be permitted to read something like Aaron Bastani's Fully Automated Luxury Communism, contemporary work relative to those. But I'm not going to link to it. I always link audiobooks to books if I think they are relevant, and tell you why. It was written by Aaron Bastani a few years ago in collaboration with a neoliberal friendly think tank in the UK. And the essential problem, without going into great detail there, is the idea that you can engage with this quite passively, allowing the neoliberal ruling elites of the Western world to continue in their dominion and continue to fully automate various sectors. And when that full automation is complete, then luxury communism will be your reward for being such a good little boy. You should be able to sniff out the problems with that. Many sectors have been highly automated, basically fully automated, for the better part of a century, or certainly many decades, such as fields to do with farming. The work of farming is not really just the work of Farmer Joe on his farm farting around. It is, of course, a highly mechanized set of processes. So this would be a field that has become basically fully automated. But consider the people who, by the logic of a book like Fully Automated Luxury Communism, would have benefited by this fully automated, full automation of the sector. us, Africans descended of slaves or sharecroppers in the United States, the people who basically built most of the country and also built these specific fields, the growing of plants. Are Africans descended of slaves now equal shareholders of in this high automation of farming, as one would suppose if capitalists were capable of doing what Aaron Bastani says they are? The idea is laughable, right? When you actually look at its real world effects and the thoughts behind this. Africans have been excluded from those for-profit concerns, and furthermore, because of people like these that I mentioned, such as liars like Bernie Sanders, not even having the necessaries of the safety net, the booby prize of having their minimum needs met, despite having their livelihoods stolen from them, and not just their livelihoods, but this the fruits of this automation, which would have rightfully been theirs. And that is not only because of people like Senator Bernie. It is also the actions of other people that are part of this duopolistic neoliberal dog and pony show. People who people say, well, I like Bernie, but I really hate Mitch McConnell. Those are the same people, right? Those are all people who have colluded with one another over many decades to build this unlivable and unsustainable system. The cybernetic communist position, more serious cybernetic communist position, then is necessarily one more focused on building forms for the masses. And the only real distinction here between that and the militant Marxist, Leninist, Maoist mainline would be this recognition that advanced computing is the most powerful revolutionary weapon, and that it will allow workers to do more with less in that specific context of the abolition of private wealth and the ending of these kind of effects. And so I will talk a little bit about some other books that I read recently that I can recommend relatively recently. I mentioned Art and Cosmotechnics, a book that I read most recently, but I read other books before and since not so closely connected to systems theory or cybernetic communism or post-Marxism. But I will instead talk about some that I have read relatively recently that do fit that description, and not just list all the books that I've read, which is a lot I read. And basically have audiobooks of theory works playing at all hours. So I'm listening to 20 or 30 theory works a week and tending to prioritize works of this kind. But it's not exactly a good thing to become too preoccupied with advanced computing in these studies. I would recommend for people generally to read the books that I mentioned, the canonical Marxist-Leninist works that I mentioned, as being of as great value as anything that's been written, or far greater value than anything that's been written more closely to do with cybernetic communism. Similarly, if your anti-establishment impulse is not guided by a desire to see the liberation of the peoples of the global South, and marginalized groups in the global North of a similar kind, is it not guided for genuine concern for those people? Like, what are you even doing, right? Like, and that's that essential problem. You say, oh well, that's not me. But if you read a book like Settlers by Jake Sakai, and really take that to heart, you'll quite quickly realize that that is kind of you in all likelihood. Might not be you specifically, but it is overwhelmingly the problem. So much so that thinkers like Manning Marable, of the 21st century liberation thinker of great skill, an African American, a new African writer, pointed out that and others echoed this around the time, that if lowest level socialism were built in the United States would effectively still have these aggressively apartheid and anti-new African elements so baked into it that it would still be a very undesirable situation for new Africans and Turtle Islanders and other marginalized group, perhaps to a slightly lesser degree. Chicano people have as much violence done to them as Turtle Islanders. There's overlap there in recent years because they are now a more significant part of the population. Nothing to crow about because that insignificance of the Turtle Islander population is a result of centuries and centuries of violent genocidal acts. That's very often the response of European descended socialists and the European descended fascist pig generally of the United States is doing all that they can to minimize those ongoing genocidal activities. So I will recommend audiobook playlist that starts with the work called Unlimited Genocides, or rather, what's the title? It's there's an anti-imperialist playlist that specifically focuses on concerns to do with the new African, the Turtle Islander, the third worldist thinker. These are important areas for scientific socialists and scientific communists, that if these are not your area of interest in all of this, you are making a bad mistake. If you're not emphasizing these things, you are making a bad mistake. And you know, a person like Bernie Sanders will tend to say that he is interested in those marginalized groups, right? But he has dual citizenship in a country, and more importantly, question of the dual citizenship thing in fascist Israel can sometimes be a little bit confused. So let's look at his position as a U.S. Sitting politician. He says he doesn't take IPAC money, right? But he continues to support this $1 trillion a year super polluting abomination of the military and industrial complex, and in so many other ways supporting this Israeli regional superpower puppet regime of that military industrial complex. So the fact that he doesn't take money from IPAC, in some ways he's worse than these open rightists on this subject, because again, he's presenting himself as the leftist, but that somehow doesn't make him into an anti-imperialist, or someone like Chris Hedges, who in campaigning alongside of his friend Ralph Nader, were both openly calling for one of the worst ideas in human history, the Red-Brown Alliance, that is to say, to sabotage the consciousness raising and other important work of serious revolution-oriented folks by not convincing the Browns, fascists, to become serious revolution-minded people, but rather to work with them, which is, of course, an absurd notion. You wouldn't work with saboteurs. If you're building a machine, you wouldn't say, I'm going to work with this person whose job is to destroy the machine, and maybe we'll make more progress by doing that. The machine of building dual power in the United States, build the massification and collectivization of United States institutions, which is necessarily a human-centered project, along the lines of what I said about mutual aid. You do not advance that project by talking about this Red-Brown Alliance. And there are people not so well known as Chris Hedges or Ralph Nader, who are now identifying as communists, who are guilty of this as well. Perhaps the most famous of these to emerge in recent years would be someone like Jackson Hinkle. So why should you avoid the strategy? Well, it's a pretty clearly crypto-fascistic strategy, and you might not think of Hedges as being associated with this problematic feature in the way that you would with someone like Hinkle. But indeed, when they were campaigning in various contexts, Nader and Hedges were running this kind of dog and pony show with a open far-rightist fascist, Christian fascist personality, Pat Buchanan. So if you're friends with a famous fascist and doing press with a famous fascist, that's a problematic thing. That is the thing that's not helping us to stop this ticking time bomb that's going to kill humankind if we do not transform the industrial bases, particularly abolish military industrial complex by 2029. A few other things about the literature here. Some books that I would highly recommend. A book that I liked a lot by Nick Dyer Witheford called Cyber Marx, Cycles and Circuits of Struggle in High Technology Capitalism. Again, it's like a lot of these things, able to give you insights into the problems of hypercapitalism and advanced technology under capitalistic and fascistic formations, but it's not actively going to help you in that more proactive project of building a people's superintelligence. When that book was written, again, these people can be forgiven a little bit because the prospect of building a people's superintelligence, of using AI agents, these were not things that had entered the vernacular. So mostly what these type of people, and Cyber Marx is not the worst offender, but mostly what these post-Marxists of the late 20th and early 21st century are doing is kind of more like grasping at straws to find a coherent thread to do with the people's superintelligence in the absence of the tools to build a people's superintelligence. And this is something that academics will do across disciplines and centuries, almost as a matter of course. In this 21st century ticking time bomb context, it's not really suitable, however. Another work that I will recommend with similar themes to that of Witheford is Peter Frey's For Futures, Life After Capitalism. I found that to be quite consistent with cybernetic communist thinking. Another is Future Histories, What Ida Lovelace, Tom Paine, and the Paris Commune Teach Us by Lizzie O'Shea. That one certainly fit the bill of being better than these, than the average, like this book that was critical, admittedly critical to a high degree of Slavoj Žižek that I mentioned, Does the Internet Have an Unconscious? That's a book by Clint Burnham. And it's a book that I won't recommend or link to like I will to these others. But it does provide some insights into this contemporary hyper-connected world. You can you do more, I think, to think in terms of technological planned economies or planned economies generally, like in the canonical works that I described. And so in service to that, I'll recommend a book called The Salvador Allende Reader. And I think that a good thing to do before you read that is to familiarize yourself with the CyberSyn technological planned economy generally. This is a work that a project, the CyberSyn project, would have led to the prospect for people's superintelligence being built, an AI takeoff effect before the present time or before the next few years or decades. I think that had the fascist United States not destroyed Allende's Chile and installed its puppet, the dictator Pinochet, who murdered millions, many hundreds of thousands of nice working folks in Chile for the crime of supporting Marxist-Leninist ruling party. Almost none of those people had guns. They were mostly people like school teachers who were merely trying to build a humane and sustainable economic system in their own fucking country. And people like Kissinger and other animals of the fascist West, many of whom are still in positions of power today, positions of great influence today, took it upon themselves to murder, as they've done in many lands, many times over. That book that I recommended, I forgot the title, but it's Endless Holocausts. That's a most succinct description of this effect, describing the United States actively murdering 300 million people largely in these contexts of anti-communist wars and wars of theft. Much of Southeast Asia, except for the smallest countries and Thailand, all the other countries of Southeast Asia suffered losses up to 25% of their population being firebombed to death by the fascist U.S. or otherwise being murdered by the fascist U.S. sometimes a little less than 25%, sometimes 20 or 15%. That's all of Southeast Asia, an Indo-Chinese genocide perpetrated by the fascist United States. Every single one of those people was murdered specifically to save them from communism. That's to say, save them from having a humane and sustainable economic system in their own country. This has been the only job of the United States. And so the neoliberals, who very much derive from this Pinochet activity, this is in some ways the germ of the neoliberal supremacy today. These people are tending to now be describing themselves as hyper-capitalists and tech accelerationists, effective accelerationists. But these people who sabotaged the building of a people's superintelligence in decades past, and who have now built technological formations that serve little such function, not helping to build a humane and sustainable world. These are not people who should be given any credit at all for being good people or drivers of an AI takeoff. If there is such a thing as this bourgeois AI takeoff going on, it is absolutely not going to combat the concerns of this ticking time bomb. The builders of the ticking time bomb are not going to defuse the ticking time bomb. The destroyer of the people's superintelligence, which could have easily derived from that admittedly quite rudimentary but still cybernetic technological planned economy that was being developed in 1971 to 1973 before that was destroyed, that would have triggered across the global south and in the region the building of technological planned economies, which would have become the basis for probably not precisely the same machine learning basis for people's AI takeoff that I've described here. But you can obviously see that that is laying the groundwork for doing that same work at an earlier time in another context. If you don't see that, if you don't draw the lines between the problematic elements of these fascistic institutions and the good aspects to do with technology in the Marxist-Leninist institution, you, my friend, are a victim of Project Mockingbird kind of brainwashing in service to these ruling elites that most European descended people suffer from to a very high degree, so much so that I think you can just use the term European descended fascist pig as synonymous with European descended person, and in almost every case not be too far off the mark. You will be mischaracterizing only 1 in 1,000 people in doing so. Not great numbers. And maybe when that changes, it will be less appropriate, in my view, to call the European descended U.S. person a European descended fascist pig. I don't see that happening though right now. A short work. A short work that I was recommending in the context of understanding a technological planned economy, more important than a lot of this post-leftist, post-Marxist, post-modernist jazz shit. It would be to understand the building of technological planned economies. So pretty accessible a view of that might be simply listening to the podcast episode of Paris Marx's Tech Won't Save Us, where he interviews Eden Medina. And that is a pretty good overview of what was going on with the building of a technological planned economy in Chile. And we can just search for videos on a search engine using that word, cybersid, one word, C-I, no, not the Spanish spelling, C-Y-B-E-R-S-Y-N. And if you search that term and look for videos, find other videos that are short and quite accessible before you begin reading works like the Salvador Allende Reader, which does not mention at extremely great length the project of building a technological planned economy, but it's more about his work generally as a Marxist-Leninist elected head of state. He suffered from some of those failings that I would attributed to people like Chomsky or Richard Wolff, in the fact that he believed in the electoral systems. The electoral systems didn't believe in him, right? He was killed and replaced, and his movement was killed and replaced. So that's a big mistake for Marxist-Leninists to stipulate pacifism, because their enemies are not pacifistic. Right? We can stipulate pacifism at some time in the future when the ruling elites are no more, but you cannot stipulate that in the present, as people like Richard Wolff and Chomsky are tending to do, or the more egregious examples of Sanders, Hedges, Nader, and just the kind of borderline idiocy of Žižek in that context as well. But there are other longer form works that relate more to cybersyn as well. So if you just search cybersyn and videos, you'll find some short and long, and you can, in the course of an hour or two, have a better understanding of technological planned economies than you would by spending some years reading a lot of post-Marxist shit. A work that's not terrible in this context would be Nick Snursik's and Alex Williams' Accelerate Manifesto, which is also short, a pamphlet length work. It's a manifesto for an accelerationist politics, but it contextualizes this set of concepts sufficiently in the liberation and revolutionary thought to be of value, whereas other such works, like those written by Nick Land, which I would not link to or recommend, or even worse still, by Curtis Yarvin, a techno-fascist, that tend to write about tech accelerationism. These are not works that you should read, and you should even forget that I mentioned those names. And if you see someone suggesting to you that you read books by those people, you should kick them firmly in the stomach and tell them to eat shit. Well, that is not all of the works to do with cybernetic communism with reasonable insights. For example, Jean Mieville, I have difficulty pronouncing this French name, wrote a book, and I guess I will link to that. It does give a quite substantial critical view of the fantasies of the Western technologist. But again, it's not so closely related to the building of a people's superintelligence, or even pushing up to such aspirations. It's more a criticism of these other concerns. There are others that I do not have on the present list in front of me, but that I might be able to link to in the comments here. So I hope that I've given some ideas about this, and there's a good deal more that I could say on this subject, but well, I will say a few things about the building of a people's superintelligence, the building of this open source large language model, mass formation as workforce multiplier. Again, we should emphasize that that's distinct from other mass formations, in that it might allow, say, 10,000 people using an agentic mass, 10,000 people in the most. There are two ways to describe this people's superintelligence being developed in the course of 2025. One would be a nonprofit organization with some resources, building a portal, a progressive web application that would allow any machine to engage with this agentic mass, even if they don't have a GPU, by making use of virtual GPU services. So allowing a lot more people to potentially participate in something like this. This would cost at minimum some thousands of dollars to build this portal. Not an expensive project, but not something that could be done in quite the same ad hoc way as, say, 10,000 people who are, let's say, open source software or Linux enthusiasts or blockchain enthusiasts or almost anyone interested in things along these lines, joining together who have GPU machines. And this would allow for less upfront work in and merely basically requiring them to modify some of these open source large language models, at least one, to interoperate with one another and create the barest portal, which would allow for the interactivity, the responding to prompts within the steerers of this agentic mass. Not dissimilar experience from that you have with current chatbots, but these chatbots would be actually working on something in this massified context. So these are two ways that this could be done in the year 2025. Both of them would rely heavily on this emergence of AI agents as things which are, according to serious thinkers in this field, right now passing the Turing test, or something rather like it, becoming actors rather than mere regurgitators of academic writing. So in these conversations about a people's superintelligence that I have done quite a lot of, I often talk about something that I have referred to. I coined this term universal super longevity to describe the achievement of radical life extension in every land through an outcome which can only be achieved through similar force multiplying effects of an AI-driven single-payer public health service in those lands. Of course, the people who generally support radical life extension are more creatures of the for-profit death care system in the U.S. So people who are opposing the building of even a basic public health service, much less an AI-driven public health service. So these are people who are not actually doing the thing that they're saying they're doing, much like Bernie Sanders is not actually doing the thing he's saying that he's doing in wanting a public health service, but actually serving the thing that is the chief impediment to a public health service in the U.S., the military-industrial complex, and the chief impediment to a sustainable world generally for everyone on Earth, the U.S. military-industrial complex. So these creatures, these other imperialistic neoliberal creatures of the radical life extension world, they're not to be trusted. They're mostly crypto-fascists pretending to be something they are not. But nevertheless, when I talk about a people's superintelligence, I insinuate this conversation of AI-driven single-payer public health service leading to universal super longevity into most of these conversations because it's true and it's important and it's an issue close to my heart, but also because what happens when Ray Kurzweil, this preeminent radical life extensionist of the early 20th century, who has been saying for many years that he has reached, he thinks that he may have reached indefinite lifespan by these neoliberal friendly mechanisms that serve people like him, mega millionaires, but not anyone else. What happens when he dies of old age? Well, all of these radical life extensionists, including many of people in positions of influence in the United States, will be very much considering the error of their ways and considering the building of people's superintelligence, if it is the driver of this thing that motivates them, such as the AI-driven public health service. Similarly, another important thing to point out in discussing then Zionist cybernetic communism would be its relation to more anarchistic formations. You can probably ascertain from this conversation about militancy and the significance of the state socialist projects that I would not call myself an anarcho-communist or anarcho-anything. I consider people who describe themselves as anarcho-communists as engaging with problematic features not unlike that of Senator Sanders again, thinking that they are serving the cause that they serve, but actually equating the formations that have been in a position to fight financial capital and empire as being problematic, and so then basically engaging with CIA talking points and serving empire despite their desire to fight against empire. That is what you do when you engage with anarchist thought over the more serious revolutionary thought of the Marxist-Leninist Maoist mainline. And but the formation of this people's superintelligence as described, it would be foolish to not describe that as something very anarcho-syndicalist. It is a decentralized formation, and that is a strategic necessary, not guided by these ideological mistakes, but rather guided by a desire to avoid the fate of our friend Salvador Allende and so many others. That is to say, state actors have been easily crushed by these fascistic powers. When someone sneers at you, US, European descended fascist pig sneers at you and say socialism doesn't work, they are really blaming the victim, right? Because the people who they are supporting are responsible for socialism not working. If socialism actually didn't work, US would not have had to install Pinochet, causing the death of 1 million+ people. And the United States would not have had to firebomb most of Southeast Asia, causing the death of 20 to 25% of the people in many countries there. Every country except for the small countries in Thailand. So that is a serious problem to build something agile enough, amorphous enough, and amorphous in the sense of being beyond borders, right? If you have 10,000 people building this incipient people's superintelligence with GPUs on their machines, knocking out any one single of those nodes in many countries does nothing to stop this thing. That is the element that is what would not have been absolutely necessary had fascists not killed Salvador Allende, for example, or undermined the outcomes of technological planned economies elsewhere. It's no coincidence, in my view, that the Soviet Union was illegally disbanded at the precise moment when network computing was becoming a commonplace in households around the world, because the Soviet Union would have been in a position at that time to do the thing like CyberSyn. They had a project on the books called OGOSH. It was not greenlit in the way that CyberSyn was. It was not. Allende was actively building a technological planned economy. The Soviets never did that. But they had a large body of writing, larger than the body of writing written before the CyberSyn project was greenlit on the subjects. That could have been operationalized in this era of network computing, and would have been. So when you say, why did these things happen? Why were these countries, why did they, quote, fail? They didn't fail. They were destroyed by fascists. That's not a failure, right? If you're riding in your car and I come and cut your brake lines, say, "Wow, your car really sucked." No, your car didn't suck. A psychopath cut your brake lines. That's a different problem. um, the This is anarcho-syndicalist form of this project is strategic, necessary, but in my view, should not be guiding your thinking on subjects of this kind. But as I said, of these neoliberal and imperialist radical life extensionists, perhaps coming to the People's Superintelligence Project in spite of themselves, because it's the only way to do the thing that they want, we should view the anarchist people who are even being somewhat misguided in, say, parroting things that serve the ends of the CIA-run world in ways that they shouldn't, are still a better class of comrade than anyone else, except for those more serious revolutionary thinkers, the Marxist-Leninists and such. This is an area where we have to not accept the stupidity of neoliberals and anarchists, but rather bring these people through consciousness raising, not through a red-brown alliance wherein they would sabotage or undermine the projects, but bring them around to the way that would actually serve their goals. And this is an extremely important point. As I've said, we are sitting on a ticking time bomb that is the capitalistic climate apocalypse that is down to basically three sets of sectors. These military industrial complexes. The United States is $1 trillion a year super polluter, unlike anything else in existence, in its role in mass murder and economic instability, and in this instability of our climate. But there are others, the UK or Germany have not dissimilar percentage expenditures, just being smaller places. And all of those must ultimately be destroyed in this time frame. But destroying the ringleader, the fascist United States, would be on the top of that list. And if that were done, we would then be in a position to change these other offending industrial sectors. And there's a lot of overlap between these military-industrial complexes. The military-industrial complex would not be the world's worst polluter were it not making tremendous use of fossil fuels. But fossil fuel sectors across a variety of forms and concerns are the second worst problem there. And by some recent studies of recent years, the livestock systems, factory farms, and other livestock systems that are basically providing a luxury product. You can live without consuming animal products very easily and happily. You can consume products that are facsimiles of these, like the cheeses and hamburgers and chicken nuggets that taste exactly the same. The fact that you don't consume those products and push back at this suggests that you are culturally invested in this outcome of causing the capitalist climate apocalypse, a suicidal set of language that I often see people who are self-described as scientific socialists or scientific communists. When it comes to this subject, they suddenly turn into fascists. But the study said that 51% of the total causes of human activity leading to the capitalist climate apocalypse might be attributed, that's to say the majority, slight majority, might be attributed to livestock systems. So in this analysis where you do not recognize the problematic features of the U.S. military-industrial complex, you might say livestock systems are worse. But no, the thing preventing you from having livable farming systems. The military-industrial complex is the worst thing there, despite that other numerical analysis. So these three sectors must be dismantled. These three sets of sectors must be dismantled post haste for us to have a chance at continued survival of humankind. And you might say, geez, man, I don't know. I don't think everyone will die. Many billions of people will die, but I don't think everyone will die. So let's say that you're right, and not all 8.2 billion humans become extinct, but let's say 7.7 billion humans become extinct. I wonder, from whence will those 7.7 dead humans hail? Well, who is already being murdered in great number by the capitalist climate apocalypse and displaced in great number by the capitalist climate apocalypse? It's the people who had virtually no climate impact, no environmental footprint, a tiny fraction of the environmental footprint is attributed to people from the African continent, for example, whereas by a 20th century study, something like 65% of those effects were attributed, even without that analysis of the centrality of the military-industrial complex, to the United States, to North America specifically. And so that number is balanced out a little bit, only because, not because the U.S. is doing less dirt than it was at that time, but because the industrial capacities of other countries have grown. But it's still accurate to say that the European descended fascist pig, that's to say European descended people generally, who make up 9%, as opposed to the other 91% of living humans, who make up 9% of the world's population, are responsible for approximately 80% of this problem, historically and into the present day. So when you say, I don't think everyone's going to die, you are saying just about the most racist words that everyone's ever uttered, because you're urging that people not take action that they must take to avoid if 95% of all humans die in the next few decades, what are the chances that you will survive? The chances might be higher for the European descended person, but that's still you playing Russian roulette if you're a European descended person. So it's not really a kind of statement guided by serious pragmatism, but what it is guided by is a desire to launder the crimes, launder the bad reputation of the fascists and ruling elites most responsible for these problems today, by saying, "Oh, I don't think everyone will die." But that project of killing 95% of all humans, predominantly in the global south, is substantively no different from the project undertaken by Columbus in the early 1500s, where he went to various islands where there used to be Taino people and Native American people living on those islands. They are no more because all of the people living on those islands were placed in bondage and forced to work on plantations or on the mainlands, also in mines. And because those islands people were all placed on plantations and worked 18 hours a day without sufficient food, they all died. There are no Taino people. There are only remnants of people with some Taino ancestry. When you say, I don't think everyone will die, you are worse than Columbus, worse than the worst of slavers, because you are supporting a system that will be penalizing people who are not responsible, whereas you yourself are the one more responsible, and the Western ruling elite more responsible still for this set of concerns. And this is, again, an act of genocide unlike any other, as bad as any in history. I would say that the American descended fascist pig of today, rather the European descended fascist pig of North America today, is a worse person than the slave owner and slave trader of the 1800s. As violent as their actions were not contributing to the total destruction of the species as yours are today when you repeat these various CIA talking points. So I hope that the urgency of adopting something like the people's superintelligence, or these ideas distinct from cybernetic flavored lines of Marxist thought, these things that I would say are more fully realized cybernetic communist thought, the Benzianist cybernetic communist thought, that you will consider these, and irrespective of whether you absolutely agree with these views on the state and state socialism, that you work to build this people's superintelligence. And that's another feature of the building of a people's superintelligence by the mechanisms that I've described, is one need not be a cybernetic communist scholar to participate in this. The AI agentic mass will be guided by people who are operating on those guidelines, and your role as a person downloading the specially tailored large language model and participating in a quite limited way. It could be as little as a few yes or no questions in the course of a week that would be required of a person. So doing things like leaving an application running when their computer is on and answering a few yes or no questions, that's not an onerous workload. But because of the form and orientation of this AI agentic mass and the people's superintelligence itself, you don't have to have a real deep understanding or strong agreement with the goals or thinking of the people's superintelligence to nevertheless be participating in project of that caliber. So this is why I would not limit participants in people's superintelligence to people who have a deep understanding or demonstrated commitment in the way that the early Soviets, for example, limited a party activity to people who fit those more specific descriptions, because time and again they were finding that allowing people who did not fit those descriptions was allowing saboteurs in their midst, allowing foxes in the henhouse. But there would be, of course, a line there. Would say you would not want to have people participating in the people's superintelligence who are working for a U.S. three-letter agency, perhaps, but people who are merely not as well versed in these things, or not having consciousness raised to the degree that they should, could nevertheless be participating. A good example would be building this thing out from participants from a blockchain enthusiast community. Many of those people would be more anarchism minded, and not all of those people would be absolutely supporting the Marxist-Leninist mainline that I described that should better guide this, but nevertheless they could be of use there. This is generally could be referred to as right opportunism. And I'll give another example from early 20th century history. At the turn of the century, there were some German billionaires, effectively, adjusting for inflation, who were class traitors to their own class, the capitalistic and fascistic classes, and supported, materially supported with significant donations and use of resources, the project of building state socialism in Russia, soon to be the Soviet Union. And I think of these people, the radical life extensionists, and their shock at the possible death of Ray Kurzweil in some years, as people like this, people who might prove to be the right kind of class traders, who might prove to support the people's AI takeoff and the people's superintelligence, and thus proving themselves not to be the actual oligarchs that they would seem to be when the time comes. This is not an extremely common outcome. The German class trader that I described, at this type of activity generally, almost every billionaire and mega millionaire, without fail, will act as in a way consistent with their class interests, which is actually not consistent with any interest, right? Not when you have this ticking time bomb of the capitalist climate apocalypse. But the fascists are not intelligent people, so they will maintain their power and maintain these systems of unsustainable private wealth, even though it's going to kill them and everyone else. If they were intelligent people, they would be communists. They are not. But there is always a chance, in fact, a very high likelihood, that as everyone is forced to this realization that we are seeing the effects of this ticking time bomb, and that if we do not transform all of these industrial bases, most notably abolishing the U.S. military-industrial complex by sometime in 2029, there will be no humankind left in the decades to follow at some point. Even people of this kind, fascistic actors, people of the ruling elite, the bourgeois, are capable of coming to that understanding. And some of them, in some limited way, say some of this now. But it's not nearly enough, and it's not having any effect on the dismantling of the U.S. military-industrial complex or doing the actual necessaries. Most of the people who push up to saying something like this, they would be people more like Bernie Sanders, who is not actually trying to abolish private wealth and thus in no position to even begin to stop these problems. It's non-negotiable ending the U.S. military-industrial complex. It's ultimately non-negotiable in every sense. It's non-negotiable that we must also end private wealth itself, the source of these ravages. It's only a question of priorities as to what thing might be strategically necessary first. So I hope that this conversation of fascistic and capitalistic institutions, the military-industrial complex, the state, socialistic and communistic institutions, and the state of the people's AI takeoff, as opposed to the ongoing bourgeois AI takeoff, have given you some things to think about. And again, I will thank you for your time. I think that we can see things well beyond the effects of even universal super longevity, which is simply the AI-powered single-payer public health system advancing to such a degree that ordinary citizens have reached this point of indefinite lifespan, of these kind of effects, which are not so speculative as they were in decades past. In centuries past, a person talking about indefinite lifespan would have been correctly disregarded as a lunatic. And I think it's not incorrect to regard radical life extensionists of this neoliberal kind in that way. because they are talking about for-profit concerns doing a thing that they're not capable of doing, but also just because they, by not recognizing this force multiplier of this single payer AI-driven public health service, they are sabotaging their own goals. So, a person who says they want to do something but is actually working against it is rightly a person to be mocked or called a fool. But we can see effects, I think, well beyond that of radical life extension in the wake of this people's AI takeoff, such as at such time as human rights are extended to human beings. We can then see things like becoming a spacefaring society, pushing up the so-called Kardashev scale, transforming the industrial bases into dramatically different forms in other ways, which also, of course, must be done sustainably. And so these outcomes would be quite utopian. Everyone living as long as they want, presumably not longer. If you say, I don't want to live an indefinite lifespan, well, you're kind of living on an indefinite lifespan principle today, right? You remember to drink some water today, and if you get an email from your doctor saying you need to come to the doctor, you'll go and do that, right? You're living on an indefinite lifespan principle today. You've not opted to end your life. And you would continue to do that if you were a healthy, happy person at age 100. So the rhetoric about not supporting indefinite lifespan is largely just sort of romantic and humanistic in the worst sense. But even that is a modest outcome compared to the utopian outcomes that can derive from the people's technological singularity. The AI singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day, you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For you see, my beloved comrade, very soon, cybernetic communism will win. Thank you.